Warning: the radio broadcast you're about to hear was made by men and for men. It may at times seem a little rough around the edges, brash, and certainly not canonically approved by papal authority. But its content may indeed challenge you to become the man, father, husband God has called you to be. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to another week of The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. So glad you are here. As you know, we've been doing our Instagram interview series over the past several weeks. Had a great group of guests on. Last week, we had the Cuban American Catholic, my good friend Tico, and we've just had a great bunch of guests. This week, we do not plan on disappointing. Have a great guest lined up, and we're going to get right to it. So today, I'm very thankful that the Armed Catholic is going to be joining me. The Armed Catholic is an organization dedicated to providing the Catholic community with education and training in the field of firearms. The Armed Catholic is operated by, out of Rhode Island native, Richard Captain Middle America Barrett, hailing to us from Waco, Texas. He is also the host of the Rick Barrett Brief on the Crusade channel, host of News from the Pew on YouTube with our own Steve Cunningham, who will be doing a Sensus Fidelium show coming up in the next week here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Rick Barrett. Rick, thanks for joining me today.
I'm always honored to come on and talk to anybody, so I'm very appreciative, my friend. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, man, I'm so glad. I appreciate you you answering that call. I put a little ad out on Instagram several weeks ago, and very thankful. I got to say, I didn't make connections. You know, I'm a fan of News from the Pew with Steve Cunningham on there, and of course, he's a local boy here in Charlotte. So I didn't put two and two together till you and I had a quick talk the other day. And man, I'm just, after finding out all the things you've got your hands on. I mean, a 2-hour daily show on the Crusade channel. There's a saying, you know, if you need to get something done, you give it to a busy person, and I know how that feels. So I know that you are one of those kind of guys.
I try to be. Idle hands is the devil's work, as they say. So my hands need not be idle ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, my wife, she's asking me all the time. She goes, I don't know how you do everything you do. And I'm like, I don't know. Honestly, I feel like I'm doing it for God's glory, and God bends those lines of time somehow, some way to get all this stuff done. Sometimes I guess he needs his soldiers, his warriors out there. So I'm definitely thankful and appreciate that you taking the time out of your busy schedule as well. I guess tell everybody out there a little bit about the Armed Catholic.
So, as you said in the introduction, the Armed Catholic is an organization dedicated to the education and training in the field of firearms. It says to the Catholic community, but I am open to speaking to anybody and training and talking to anybody about firearms. But being an avid gun enthusiast, as the saying would go, it's very difficult, or it's been difficult in the past, to express said opinion on firearms because there is a lot of hesitation around it. People have them, but it's kind of like the thing we don't talk about. Oh, yeah, I have a gun. You have one too? I have.
It's true.
Let's not talk about any of that stuff.
Right.
And so I am more than happy to say, yes, I am a gun owner, and I am a proud Catholic, and I am within the church teachings to do so, especially when we have influential bishops and the USCCB in general constantly banging the drumbeat of ending gun violence. And then we have the Holy Father, who's made many a statement in the past, which rallies up the more leftist section of the Catholic Church. And I think a lot of men and women, but mostly men, are I don't want to say neglecting, but failing to understand that in the defense of your family, you can use firearms to do so. And as long as you fit in within certain teachings, and you fit in with within the catechism or within the Code of Canon Law, which you can all find at thearmedcatholic.com. I have it under Truth, Magisterium, anything and everything you could need to debate a leftist Catholic in the terms of firearms. I have all of it. So
awesome.
Hmm?
No, that's awesome. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. So the whole point is, I love guns. I was a teacher for 10 years before I became a member of the Crusade channel, thanks to Mike Church. And I'm not to be boastful, but I'm actually a pretty good teacher. And I love firearms as well. So it was only natural to merge the two passions. And the way I explain it, I love God. I love God and our faith. Among everything else, right after family is guns. Like, I love guns. I think guns are super cool. And so I just kind of want everybody else to understand that they are super cool as well.
Yeah, they're not taboo. For some reason, they've fallen under the idea of taboo in today's world. And I mean, like you mentioned, even St. Thomas Aquinas addresses self-defense in his Summa. And there's certainly no problem there, and actually a duty to defend your life and the life of your family, or in any unjust situation. So, yeah, very important. I know when we talked, you mentioned you haven't been around guns quite so much your whole life. That's kind of maybe 10 or so years. You just introduced to them, right?
Yeah, I was from Rhode Island. I'm born and raised in Rhode Island up until the age of about 25. First gun introduction was not until I moved here to Texas, and I was actually very not anti-gun, but I was, whatever your liberal soy male talking points about guns are, I have repeated those in the past. And so once I was introduced to them, it's kind of like people who get tattoos or people who discover like a can of Pringles. Once it was the first one, that was it for me. It was a very long and dangerous road, because my mom was a Rhode Island, liberal, essentially, in the case, God rest her soul, not to speak terribly over, but she drilled in my head, guns are bad, can't use guns, and so forth and so on. And that's all I had known until I came down here, and the rest, they say, after I shot my first gun, was history.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've got a few of my own. I don't shoot them as much as I would like. I haven't had a lot of time with my sons, but I definitely want to get to that point of introducing them to that, so that it's not something scary, so that it's something that, hey, I've had the talk. You're old enough. I'm not around. You've got to protect the family. I've got six kids, and my oldest is just turned 15. And so I don't want him to be afraid of that. We want to have men who can, raise boys that can be men that can defend themselves, of course, and then, defend the family, defend the church ultimately, because, that's something that's not far off on the horizon. And we're already seeing, so many attacks. So it's very important. I know coming off of Roe versus Wade, there was a lot of threats, and a lot of credible threats. And, we don't hear all the stories. I think we only hear of the bad stories. We don't hear as many of the good stories where armed folks, defended themselves, a church. Of course, in Texas, I think there was one a while back. Folks, armed and were able to defend the church from an attacker. So I know the men around here, some, get together and, on a regular basis, just talking about, what would happen, what's what are plans, what should we do? And you've got to. I mean, it goes through my head almost every Sunday. I mean, anytime I'm really out in public, I'm always kind of aware of my surroundings. And even in mass, unfortunately, that's just where we are. Watching the doors, looking for suspicious people and things like that. So it's always good to be aware. And I know we're going to talk about some of that as we get down into the show here. So as with a lot of my conversations with folks through Instagram, there's been a kind of a common denominator of sorts. And a lot, several of them brought up Catholic, brought up in the Catholic Church. But many have been brought back, through reversion or conversion stories. The traditional Latin Mass has been kind of an underlying theme That's it's becoming a little bit of mainstream. Even we're hearing about actors that have found out about it. And my reversion story came through the traditional Latin Mass, and so many others. And if you could talk a little bit about your life growing up. I think you mentioned you were brought up Catholic as well.
Yeah, I'm a cradle Catholic, which means there was about a 10-year period where I wasn't Catholic at all. So growing up in a household of divorced parents, the whole idea of going to church was instilled with me. It was one thing that I shared with my father growing up. We used to go to church every Sunday, and then after he passed, I still went, but in my early 20s, my 20s period, the college experience, I was definitely not Catholic, and outside of that, I definitely was not Catholic either. My road to conversion began probably in 2014-ish. It coincides a lot with my church. I'm going to mention him again. He had a reversion. He had a pretty I don't want to say hard, but he had a very dramatic and very powerful reversion back to the faith. And he talked about it on the Sirius XM network. And then he left there and he started the Crusade channel. And he talked about the Mass, and he talked about getting serious about the faith and making sure if you are a Catholic to act like a Catholic. And it was the first time I had heard a man actually call out fellow men and say, hey, are you actually living as a Catholic instead of just acting or LARPing, if you will, as one? And so that began my reversion back. And it wasn't his love for the Latin Mass just came through. He was a Latin Mass goer from the time he reverted. I was not. I reverted, and then I did the confession thing, and I did the going back to the faith. And at first it was Novus Ordo Masses, because I didn't really know where to find Latin Masses. So for a couple of years, and then probably my wife and I started going to the Latin Mass consistently in 2021. We've been only going to Latin Masses consistently for over a year now. Okay. That's because we found a good one in Waco, which is where we go every week, at Baylor University of all places. But it's been pretty incredible to actually embrace, because when I was in my 20s, I was kind of lost. I didn't really know. Yeah, I was going to be a teacher. Yeah, I was going to do this. Yeah, always trying to struggle to find that group or that place of acceptance. Trying to find your place in the world. And it dawned on me one day when I was actually in Mass. This may be corny, but this is actually 100% true. Never read Lord of the Rings, but I'm a huge fan of the 3 films. I'm a big film guy, so that's where I get all my things in. And one day I was sitting in Mass, and he says the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. And I was like, fellowship? Oh, hey. I'm sitting in a Mass, and I'm sitting with the greatest fellowship the world has ever known. The one holy Catholic Apostolic Church, the universal church. There's nowhere else I need to go. It's here. It spans 2,000 years. It's here. It's permanent. It's everlasting. It's enduring. And so that was really very good for me, as far as being giving me a place to go and giving me the structure I think most men need. Because in modern society there are no bumpers. There are like in bowling, you have the little bumper lanes when you're not that good, or when the little kids are, you put up little bumper lanes. Right. For Catholic men, we don't have that. We're just allowed to kind of go wherever we want. And of course that's part of free will. I understand that, but that's why the Catholic Church exists. And pick your saint, pick your discipline, pick whatever you want. The Catholic Church has an answer for it. And that's where I've been going the last, almost 8 years. I've been a better I will say this: I've been a better Catholic than I was before. I'm certainly not on the road to, well, maybe Vatican II saint, but I'm certainly not on the road to sainthood.
I hear you.
So far.
That's great. So the Novus Ordo that you begin going to, I mean, how was that? Was it a relatively orthodox environment, would you say?
No,
You
not
laugh.
really.
Why
In
are you
fact,
laughing?
because my wife and I went back and forth for a while trying to find a Novus Ordo, but she would get frustrated at me because I just couldn't. There was one mass in Keller, Texas, St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. There was the Monsignor who used to do the 7:30 masses. He was amazing. He was as close to an Orthodox or a reverent mass as you could get. No fuss, no nothing. It was that he would throw in, you do the Agnus Dei and his stuff like that. So he was great. His some of his homilies are some of the best homilies I've ever heard to this day. But then we would go to ones where my wife always got mad. She was always joke because we'd walk in, we'd sit down, and if I saw the band in the right corner up near the altar, I'm like, I'm not gonna like it here. I'm not gonna like it here at all, because in those masses, it was like I was in a bar, because they would do their set and then they would mess around and they'd move around. And I'm like, I'm trying to pray here, and they're joking and they're laughing and they're doing all this other stuff. And I am really not digging this entire thing you're doing here. So I would always have trouble with that. My wife and I moved around a lot. We tried to go to different parishes to try and find something. And then we moved from Fort Worth into the Central Texas area. And there was a decent Novus Ordo church in Temple that we would go to regularly. And the last straw for that one, when my wife was finally like, all right, yeah, we gotta, you're right, we need to find something better than this, is when the deacon, which is your first clue, it's not going to be good, had he played a clip in Mass during the homily from the Princess Diaries about the love of our Lord, and I literally almost threw a pew at the. I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
We're done. We need to find something else, because this is just absolutely mind-numbingly not what I need right now. I do not need this nonsensical, non-reverent, just performance.
Yeah.
Performance. And I've been to Latin masses in several states. I just came back from going to one in Florida where I was doing a class this weekend. No matter where I go, whether it's Florida, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, different parts of Texas, I can rely on the fact with the Latin mass that when I go there, it's going to be what I need every week. And I'm not the kind of guy that says, because I understand that in these United States that not everybody has access to it. I understand that there are other people that are like, I drive 9.5 hours, and I think that's amazing that you do that. But not everybody does. A, not everybody does, and B, not everybody knows about it. So I'm not one of these people that says, if you don't go to the Latin Mass, you going to hell, you going to die, and you going to burn. Because because there's just a lot of people that don't know. They just don't know, or they just, I'm not that kind of guy, but I am a staunch proponent of, if you can get to it, and if you can get to a really amazing one. When I was in New Hampshire last year for the St. Benedict Center conference, we went, I think it was Thomas Aquinas in Massachusetts, in like northwestern Massachusetts, this little private Catholic college, Thomas Aquinas, I believe, don't quote me. But me and a bunch of other people that went to the St. Benedict Center went to a 7:30 Mass, and it was in this gorgeous cathedral, and the priest went ham on the incense, and it filled this chapel, and it was probably one of the best experiences I've had at a Mass. Now, I've had a great experience at all the other ones, but that was one of the ones where I was truly like, I cannot go back to this other stuff. Now, in a pinch, if I've been traveling or something happens, I'm not, like I said, there are people like, I will not go to the mass and blah, blah, blah. I don't want to, I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes. I don't want to step on anybody's, but I feel like if you have access to a mass, it is on a Sunday, and you willingly choose to not go, I don't make that choice. Let me just say that.
No, I understand. That's an interesting topic. I've been talking a lot with folks about that, and that's something we're going to get into on some. You and I can talk about it too, because it's a dangerous, it's a slippery slope, man. It really is. As staunch of a supporter of the TLM as I am, my reversion back to the faith came through it. I have always made my Sunday obligation. I've not lost my faith by attending a badly said Novus Ordo. I'm not willingly going to go to a clown mass or an invalid mass, but on the other side of the coin, we have to assume that it is a valid mass. And most of them, I would say, are valid. And I know there's people out there listening. They're like, "Oh no, if it's Novus Ordo, it's not." And that's dangerous. I mean, even I've even heard that some of the folks in some traditional mass communities have requested to have separate ciborium for the host consecrated during a Novus Ordo, and then the host consecrated at a traditional Latin mass. And I think that's dangerous. So we're coming up on a break. I want to say one quick thing because I don't want to forget it. But what you're just talking about, with going to the different masses and trying to finding your way. The beauty of the traditional Latin mass is the consistency. We are creatures of habit. I mean, that is why our Lord God, I think, is a creature of habit. I mean, the sun rises, the sun sets, and the tides come and the tides go, and everything else about nature is because he loves habitualness or whatever. And so we are inclined to that as well. And so when you walk into a traditional Latin mass, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be the same. It's going to be consistent. There's not going to be this improv. So too much to say. I got to take a break. We're sitting down with Rick Barrett, the Armed Catholic, and we'll be right back. This is Jason Murphy for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas and the Obligation Radio Show here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. Catholic Radio is live and on the air at AM 1270, broadcasting from Belmont, North Carolina to the Charlotte regional area. Carolina Catholic produces more local content than most Catholic radio stations across our country. Tune in on air, online, on demand, and anytime at www.carolinacatholic.org. Make sure to catch the 2022 Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas replays each Saturday afternoon starting at 3 p.m. You can catch Keith Nestor, Tim Staples, Dr. Ray Garundi, our own Dr. John Aquaviva, and find out what the buzz is all about for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas. Also, make sure to tune in to the featured men's shows on Carolina Catholic, Faith and Sport with Dr. John Aquaviva, airing on Mondays at 5 p.m. and on demand. The Remnant with Stephen Thomas, Bill Snyder, and Ray Haywood, airing on Saturdays at 5, and my show, The Obligation, which airs at 5 p.m. on Fridays. Catch all of these shows and more at AM 1270, on air, online, and over the app at www.carolinacatholic.org. Once again, this has been Jason Murphy. God bless and Esto Vir.
Did you know that 90% of older adults wish to stay in their home as they age? Aging in place has many benefits. It tends to improve quality of life, which in return improves physical health. Also, retaining independence as we age is critically important to our mental health. Hi, my name is Meredith Dignan, and I am the president of Harmony Home Solutions and an active parishioner of St. Patrick Cathedral. We are your trusted partner for aging in place. We strive to enhance the lives of older adults and their families by providing premier aging in place and universal design lifestyle solutions that increase safety beautifully. Now is the time to get your aging in place plan in order with Harmony Home Solutions. Visit our website today at hhsclt.com. Again, that's hhsclt.com. or give us a call at 980-220-8821. Again, that's 980-220-8821. We want to help you live an empowered and beautiful life.
Thanks for sticking around. Welcome back to The Obligation. Once again, sitting down with Rick Barrett, the Armed Catholic, and the host of the Rick Barrett Brief on the Crusade channel. Rick, we were gonna jump into some things, but I really want to go back to something we were just kind of hitting on, and the idea that maybe folks should not attend Mass on a Sunday, and if they're afraid that maybe maybe the Novus Ordo isn't valid, or maybe they'll be scandalized. Again, I understand. I will never attend a Mass that that is knowingly invalid, or going to be filled with liturgical abuses, such as a clown mass and things like that. We have to put the small ones aside. We have to, I don't want to say small. We have to put aside that yes, our Lord's going to be put into people's hands. We have to put aside that yes, there are going to be potentially girl altar servers. We have to put aside that the laity may get up there and do some of the readings. That's a given. That stuff is allowed and permitted by the church. I don't agree with it, but it's there. That being said, we have to assume that a Mass is valid, I would think, unless we had foreknowledge of that, or we show up and the priest is dressed like a clown or something like that. What say you?
Yeah, if you're for some reason you walk into a Mass and then all of a sudden the guy starts sounding like Martin Luther, you can get up and leave. Right. You can get up and get out of there. You don't have to sit there and take it. I am, like I said, I call people laugh when I call myself a back pew Catholic, right? My focus is to try and get my wife and myself to heaven. That is the big thing. I do try to do some scholarly reading. I try to listen to guys like Brother Andre Marie and Mike Church and guys who are much, much, much smarter than I am in those regards. That's where I take my cues and go from. And Steve and Ryan Grant and Jonathan Arrington and all those guys from News from the Pew. I'm very blessed to be around a lot of very smart men who can help when I have questions. I also have a spiritual advisor that I can ask specific questions to as well, if I'm in a pinch. My whole thing with the skipping of the Masses is, and I do not want to step on toes, folks. This is just little Rick Barrett's opinion on this whole thing. I feel like it smacks of pride, that it's too good. I know that this is not right, and I have determined and decided that is this. Listen, if I go, here's how, and I'll say this to y'all who don't believe in the NO Mass. Let me just say this as my thinking. Once again, maybe you think it's stupid. You wouldn't be the first to think that about me in that regard.
Same.
But if I go, what's the difference in your mind if I go to a Novus Ordo Mass versus not going on Sunday? To you, it's the same thing. But for me, if I go, I'd rather at least, if it's that big of a deal in God's eyes that it's essentially the same thing, then I'm not losing anything by going.
Sure.
But let's say I'm near a Mass and I choose. Remember, now it's not like, hey, I'm in a snowstorm or at an airport and I can't get to church. I just can't get there. But if I'm literally driving by that church and it's Sunday morning or Saturday night or whenever you go, and you're like, nope, and you just keep going by it. That's something. I have enough stuff, Jason, that I have to answer to when the four final things approach.
That's right.
I don't need the one where it's like, hey man, you drove by a church on Sunday and you chose not to come and be in my presence. Because even in the Novus Ordo, it's still consecrated and it's still raised. And and you made that statement that people want them separated, the community, the hosts in different places. Well, the Latin Mass I go to, the priest is running NO Masses on Sunday. So it doesn't even matter in that regard. I'm going to a diocesan Latin Mass, so he's, they're getting mixed in. So, oh no, we're getting the dirty ones with the clean ones. So it's, for me, That's why, and lastly, when we talk about, and if we talk about like things in Rome or, the big scandals, and I tell people I'm a back pew Catholic, I'm a medieval Catholic. What does that mean? I'm just a guy on a farm, or I'd like to be on a guy. Like, I'm a guy like in the Middle Ages or in the medieval times. I'm a guy who just goes to work, concentrates on trying to get his family to heaven, and whatever this encyclical is or that encyclical is, or whatever this pope said on this airplane, or whatever this cardinal in Chicago is saying, it don't bother me none. It don't bother me none, because in the end it does not inhibit me from being able to go and worship our Lord. It doesn't inhibit my wife and I from being able to go and worship the Lord as he desires us to do on the weekends, on Sundays.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. That's where I kind of struggle. I mean, I prefer the traditional Latin Mass. Sometimes it is just not possible for our family, but I'm certainly just. We do have we have several Orthodox options, and if you talk to Stephen, you'll know that in the Charlotte Diocese we have we've kind of got a bubble here. I've been to so many others, throughout the country, and I mean, whether it's they won't give communion on the tongue to you, or they're playing the guitar from the altar, or any number of things. I mean, but we have to assume that the Mass is valid. I mean, otherwise the church, that we get into some really serious discussions about the church, the state of the church. But if it is valid, then our Lord is there, and if He is there and He can suffer through it, who am I? And I know there's a lot of folks who could probably argue that and don't like those statements, but that's where I stand on it. And I think we're going to talk more about that, because I think it's becoming more popular amongst traditional Latin Mass Catholics, and I think it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous. So we'll leave that there, and certainly be more to talk about that. But in that same conversation, talking about the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass, you mentioned Mike Church, a big player in your reversion, and also in your probably finding the traditional Latin Mass. I'm sure he was there to answer some questions. So tell us about Mike. How'd you fall in and meet Mike?
So I've been listening to Mike since 2012, when I had a car, Sirius is installed in your car, and I was working in Dallas as a teacher, but I was driving to Fort Worth, so that's a 2-hour drive every day. So I get to listen to a lot of his stuff in the morning. And as I went to different schools to teach, I brought him with me. And so I was very excited when he went to the Crusade channel, because I left Sirius as soon as he left. I've never gone back, because I believe in what the guy's saying. So he's doing the Crusade channel thing. He launches it, and I'm going for a useless master's in Homeland Security, because, like I said, at this time in my life, I'm still kind of out there. I'm still kind of trying to figure out how I can best be the leader of my home, and how my initial plan was I was going to go get this master's in Homeland and then teach at community colleges, because that's the minimum you need. You just need a community college. You need a master's, and you can teach there. So I went, and I did very well, and I graduated in like 3rd or 4th in the class, and all this other kind of stuff, and I just could not find a job. Every place I applied to, nobody even sniffed my application. So I thought, well, I'll go get a doctorate, because why not? I'm already this deep in the hole, so I might as well do that. Got accepted by Oklahoma State, got accepted by University of North Texas. And then I realized that doing it, and it was going to be online, that doing it online was going to be nearly impossible, because I was not going to be able to get a TA position or any of these other kinds of things to help support my family financially while doing this. So now I'm stranded. I'm stranded, Jason. I got no options. My initial plan has now fallen completely apart, and I'm feeling pretty down about myself at that point, because I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of applying to jobs, trying to figure out what's going to happen, what I'm going to be doing. And I'm listening to Mike the entire time. I'm listening to Mike every day when I'm doing my work. I'm doing all this other kind of stuff. And I've called into, he had a radio host named Suzanne Sherman, and she used to have the Suzanne option, and I would call in, and because I had Homeland Security, and she was a prepper, and it was a great talk we would have, because I'm kind of a prepper as well. So I would call into her show all the time. And then one day, Mike, I think it was like the second or third anniversary of the channel being active and around and existing. And he goes, I'm still looking for hosts for this network. Right now, it's me for 4 hours, and then it's one person for an hour, and then it's another person for another hour. And he's like, I need guys or girls to fill time to do this. And I don't care that you've never had broadcasting experience. I'll teach you if you're willing to do it. Just send me an email. And I got nothing. I got no prospects. Yeah. So I sent him an email. I said, my name's Rick Barrett. I've been on with Suzanne a bunch of times. I'll take your offer of trying out the broadcast thing. And I had one conversation, like, oh, you're the guy who was on with Suzanne, right? He's like, yep. And I was like, okay, well, you start, we'll do 1 hour, 2 p.m., starting next week. And so it went from 1 hour, then it went to 2 hours in the afternoon. And then he's like, guess what? You're going to midday, because you're going to come on right after me, and you're going to go 3 hours midday. Wow. And so I've started, and we switched back and forth just to kind of see if we could get different numbers. I did the morning drive for a little while, and he took midday, and we've kind of flipped back and forth. But that's for the last, I think, over 3 years. It's been Mike for 3.5, 4 hours, then me for another 3, going on this. So it's been a blessing, because I always wanted to do some kind of broadcasting back in my younger days when everybody used to watch ESPN Sports Center. I was like, I think I would like to be like a sports commentator or something like that. I always thought I wanted to do something in media. Yeah. So I'm finally, I took a very long path to get there, but now I'm finally doing it. And I couldn't be more thankful to Mike. I couldn't sing Mike's praises anymore as far as dealing with me and my growing pains, because I had never been behind a microphone ever. The only experience I had was talking to students as a teacher, for an hour or an hour and a half every day for about 10 years. So I had to try and transfer that skill over to not just blabbing on, but to try and be interesting and to try and be engaging to somebody that can't really talk back to me or can't interact with me. We have a chat room and stuff like that, but overall, it's been something that has been a skill that Mike has allowed me to grow under. And him and his wife, the people that are the owners of the Crusade channel, I cannot say enough, I could not be fortunate to work for better people.
That's great. Yeah, it sounds very similar to kind of my path and how I ended up here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. David Papandrea first contacted me just to do some cross marketing with the men's conference that I've been hosting for the last couple of years. And, he had me initially just come on and do a few little reflections and a few ads for the men's conference. And then one day he said, hey, what do you think about doing a men's show? And I was like, I don't know anything about radio. I was like, I got all kind of stuff going on, but I don't know about radio. But fast forward, 2 years later, here I am still doing it. So I'm thankful for it. It's helped me to stay more engaged in my own faith. Just kind of on top of what's going on with the church, and of course, just reading and following up on just the life of the church, and so it's helped me be more engaged. So I'm very thankful for that as well. What are some of the? What type of show is the Barrett Brief? So the Rick Barrett Brief. What do y'all focus on primarily? Is it all politics, faith, really?
The best way I could describe it is 3 hours of stream of conscience. Now, Mike is much like first of all, as you can see, this is kind of a preview. Mike is much more studied on it, so Mike speaks to matters of faith, and he's a knockout on it. Sure. I told you I'm a medieval Catholic, so I don't tend to get into stuff. I don't get into the actual theologians and this stuff and this reading and that. But I'm very much in when it comes to issues of the day, when it comes to sodomy, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to all that kind of stuff, I highlight and I speak out against it as much as possible. like for 2.5 years now, I've been warning about the MAPs, the MAPs that you're just starting to hear about.
Man.
I
Yeah.
told people for 2 years, being a former teacher as well, I'm trying to give people an insight into how in education, it's the greatest scandal in these United States history, the amount of abuse that takes place in that power structure between teachers and students. And so I try to call that out. I try to make my show interesting by we'll do an opening story. I had a guest on today. His name was Paul Bradley, and he does this thing called gethedge.io. He's into the crypto market, and his whole thing is about trying to bring people in slowly and trying to help them diversify a little bit, and trying to talk about that. We talked about the central digital bank currency and what that means for Bitcoin and Ethereum, and how Ethereum or Ether is dropping because of this whole merge they're doing. So I was able to talk to him about that. Tomorrow I'll have a guy named Daniel Savakis. He works for protectingtaxpayers.org in Washington, D.C. He's been my guest for 2 years. He's like my political inside guy. Thursdays, if I can get guests, like I'll have Suzanne Sherman back on. She'll talk about prepping, and we'll talk about Bruin and New York and the gun laws that came out of that. And then Friday, I've had a good relationship with FreedomWorks for a while, because they're one of the first people. I'm sure you understand this, Jason. Trying to find people to talk to, you would think it'd be easy.
Yeah.
Practically, it's like pulling teeth. Pulling teeth with people. You're like, hey, you want to come on my show? Oh, yeah, I'll totally come on your show. That sounds like a great idea. Yeah. And then let me check my schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to chase.
The schedule is full forever, because they never call me back, or they never talk back. So people are like, why do you talk to FreedomWorks? Because FreedomWorks gives me, in the last 2 years, they've given me 7 people. My producer and I joke, I'm like the farm league for FreedomWorks. They send me their young people that are not molded, and I take this clay and I mold them, and I teach them how to deal with interviews. And guess what, Jace? That's a free 30 minutes for me every Friday. I get to talk about whatever and whatever. Awesome. So I try to just keep it, and then we'll talk about politics. I also run a movie review website called Rick Reviews on Substack. So I do movie reviews, and then I talk about culture, and I talk about guns. I have Gun Talk Friday on the Crusade channel. Like the third hour, I do Gun Talk Friday, where I talk about not politics, but we've talked about red dots, slings, different tactics, what different types of carry positions, what's the reasonable person test if you get into a self-defense shooting. We talk about all that kind of stuff. And we've come up in the last year with this thing called the Lightning Brief, where I'll line up like 10 random stories that I don't get to, and I'll just kind of blast through them in the last 20 minutes of the show, just to try and get everybody caught up, and we kind of just go a little bit nuts on that. And it's an interesting 3 hours of radio. I'll definitely keep you entertained much as possible, because there's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of people that want to say, woe is me. I kind of, because I'm a bit sarcastic, and so I'm a bit of a smart aleck. So I tend to look at things in a humorous and as bright way as possible. Now, if I'm talking about pedophilia and abortion, folks, I'm not going to make light of that, obviously. But there was this. We did a 20-minute story on this guy who was wielding an axe in McDonald's yesterday. Yep. Got caught on social media. Jason, the guy went to the New York Post, and it's the greatest interview you'll ever read if you read it.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's fantastic, and
I want to get caught up on that, because it starts with him getting beat over the head before he pulls the hatchet. So I want to get into that and find out what that was all about. Yeah. So
it was at 2:30 in the morning, and he just wanted to use the bathroom, and apparently the security guard wouldn't let him in the bathroom. And then one thing led to another, and he was getting beat on by these other people. Yeah. So he decided to take the hatchet out, and he said he was in full control, or else he would have killed people. And
I think so. When I watched it, I mean, I'm not approving of anything he did, but if the guy wanted to kill somebody, he had more than opportunity to do so. I feel like he was very in control, because when you get to that level and people are hitting on you, and he just is leaning on the counter there, and they're beating on his head. I don't know. I'm not trying to defend him. I'm not saying I don't know. I think it's the way it was presented by the media was a little twisted from what I caught on to, but that's just me.
You might want to check out that New York Post story. Then you might
I'm gonna look it up.
You might be pro Axe guy after. I'm not saying.
I know, man. Stranger things have happened. And speaking of stranger things, before we came on, I was just getting caught up on today's news, and I imagine you probably got your thumb on this, on the pulse of what's going on in Texas. But federal judge rules gun bans for felons is unconstitutional. Have you heard about that?
I have. And I don't know. I don't know what to actually think about that. Simply because I am all in favor if somebody does, is convicted of a crime and they sincerely are in favor of trying to reintegrate into society. As a Catholic teaching, we should welcome that and try to encourage that.
Sure.
But at the same time, if that, it also depends on what crime they've been charged with.
Yeah, money laundering, something like that, and the guy just wants to defend his family. That's a different story. I don't say axe. Robbing places, robbery. With weapons. Perhaps maybe a dangerous person, something of that nature. I would say, I'd probably lean against that. So. Yeah,
because there's some wacky federal laws that would make you a felon. That you would be like, it's not really a felony, but
I agree. Yeah, that's a lot of those things. You look at the big black and white headline, and or you see the short clip of the guy with the hatchet at McDonald's, and it can be a little misconstrued there. So I don't know. I think we're gonna have to take a break on that note, and we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about some real news from the pew. I want to hear all about that. Thanks again for tuning in to The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy, talking to Rick Barrett, the Armed Catholic. We'll be right back.
Hello, Carolina Catholic family. This is David Papandrea, founder and chairman of Carolina Catholic Media. Please join us during our 2022 Catch the Spirit Pledge Drive season. Your pledge will help us better plan and allocate resources to evangelize the truth of Jesus Christ across our 7 media platforms in the Carolinas. Every dollar raised goes back into the Carolina Catholic operating and capital expense budget to grow our apostolate. When you consider the state of the world and the extraordinary times that we're living in, with a cancel culture, unprecedented media bias, mistruths and disinformation everywhere, it's clear why Carolina Catholic Media is here. Our mission is to communicate the truth of Jesus Christ and the Catholic Church to over 5 million souls in the Diocese of Charlotte and upstate South Carolina. With that comes a commitment to create diverse local programs from our parishes, schools, and ministries. Our vision is to bring everyone together as one unified Carolina Catholic community. Carolina Catholic Media is a 501c3 nonprofit. Your financial gift is 100% tax deductible. To sponsor or donate, please email me at feedback@carolinacatholicradio.org or call me at 800-857-2909. That's 800-857-2909. We appreciate your prayerful consideration to support us during our Catch the Spirit Pledge Drive. May God bless you abundantly.
And we are back. Thanks again for sticking around for the third segment of The Obligation. Having a great conversation with Rick Barrett, the Armed Catholic. And, we were just talking about some, news, the way news is portrayed, sometimes not quite the way it really is. Don't want to get too much caught up in the news these days. There's so much negative news. But speaking of news, tell us about News from the Pew. I love that show, and tell me how that all came to be.
So it came out of nowhere, and you mentioned at first about how many things I have my hands in. It all is very slow because, like I said, there was a point in time, not even 5 years ago, where my plate was completely wide open, and this starts with Mike, and then I started doing movie reviews more and more for them, and then one day, just hanging out, I get a Facebook message from Steve, and Steve's like, "Hey man, I'm starting a show. I want you to host it. And my response, I kid you not, are you sure you know who you're talking to? Sure you got the right person? I first of all, I'm flattered and I'm honored. But are you sure? And he's like, yeah. I want you to come on because I'm getting Flaz Yazzie, and I'm getting John Arrington, I'm getting Ryan Grant, and I need a guy to host it. I need a guy to kind of just set up the ball, get the show going, and let John do his thing, and let Flaz do his thing, and let Ryan do his thing, and so he said, that's what I want you to do. And I said, okay, sure, man, whatever, your fault. But so we started doing it, and just being, like I said before, being around guys like Steve and like Flaz and Ryan when he can get, because he's got he's going, his moves and stuff like that. When we get him on, and all the guys, and Flaz and John and Steve, just so great to actually be around these guys, because I'd never heard of any of them. Like I said, I'm kind of, even though I'm in media, I'm kind of insulated. So I kind of just do my own things. And it was great to actually set up and get the shows going and start to really kind of catch our stride in the last couple shows. And so the point of trying to get everybody on consistently has been a little more difficult, but we've been able to work through that as well. And I think just the idea of having a show that is focused on bringing Catholic men together,
it's
who
important.
are supportive of one another and can give can have disagreements, is what I'm trying to say, disagreements, even about certain things, and still have the same goal at the end. I mean, it's not like we have active arguments or debates even on the show. Sometimes we disagree with things here and there, but also the idea of bringing these people together and talking about stuff, because there's a lot of people that have disengaged from the legacy media, which I understand and I get it, and to try and bring the important stuff to them while having a good time doing it.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, the one thing with my involvement with kind of the radio show and kind of using social media, to kind of get out there and get folks, knowledgeable about it. Obviously, I've met so many, and it's really just kind of like boots on the ground, and I've made some really good friendships through it. And those are important because, I've talked so many times about guys, how we can just become, like islands. We isolate. We just kind of tend to gravitate. I got it. I can handle it. Big boys don't cry mentality. And we just kind of drift off, man. And that's a dangerous place, without fellowship, without brotherhood. That's why, I'm so, involved with the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas, which, quick plug, coming up on March 18th, 2023, guys, make sure you get your tickets for that. But to that point, just on a regular basis, not just showing up once a year for a men's conference, but, maybe it's a weekly call. And I'm starting, you get those calls from those guys because, we're all struggling at some point. We all need that ear at some point. So I think that's great. I mean, above and beyond, the apostolate, it's really true fellowship and brotherhood that I think we just lack in this society in such a big way. So Catholics coming together and supporting each other and helping each other, because you never know where that brother's going to be, where he is in that walk. He might be 2 steps away from the edge, man. And staying in contact and it's great because I need them just as much as they need me. And I know, like if you're like me or any guy out there, we need to have that support group. So that's great. You have that, with News from the Pew and just the many other apostolates you have. So we're getting kind of close on time, but let's talk. I've got the armed Catholic here, so let's talk about some practical self-defense duties of men, because I think you mentioned that through your faith walk, through your journey back to the church, you started to understand that in a more real way, right?
Yeah, the idea of self-defense, justified self-defense, and being able to protect you and your family members, because SCOTUS decisions say that the police have no obligation to protect you, despite what politicians or news or everybody would tell you. And of course, like I talked about earlier, the Catholic Church has answers for everything else. The Catholic Church has answers to the idea of self-defense. I mean, if you look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and just from 1997, 2263, 2264, 2265, all cover self-defense. Real quick, 2263, the legitimate defense of persons and societies is not an exception to the prohibition against the murder of the innocents that constitutes intentional killing. Quote, the act of self-defense can have a double effect, the preservation of one's own life and the killing of an aggressor. The one is intended, the other is not. And so, and then if you go into it even more, the idea that as a protector, as a man, you must have the ability to defend the life of your family, because it is a very pro-life position, because we believe in birth, conception to natural death. And what does that entail? That entails that nobody on this planet, nobody has the right to take your life from you. Nobody does. That's right. God's providence and God's time. There's no person that has the ability to, or should be able to take your life or the life of your family. And so the idea here, whether you use Pope Pius X or John Paul II or St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine of Hippo, they all talk about the fact that we live in an unjust world. We live in a fallen world. And of course, evil is a present. It is a constant. And so we must be ready to defend, never seek. I try to talk to people. We're not seeking people. Sure. We're not John Wick. We're not avenging dogs. We're not doing any of this stuff. We are making sure that we have our peaceful homes. But if there is anybody that seeks to disturb that peace, that we are ready to do it. Like St. Pius X would say, it's lawful to kill when fighting in a just war, when carrying out an order by the supreme authority, a sentence of death and punishment of a crime, and finally, in case of necessary and lawful defense of one's own life against an unjust aggressor. Pretty cut and dry. I live in a red state. You live in a purplish state. Both have. My state has stand your ground. My state has laws on the books that say you can, if somebody tries to take, because we as Catholics, we believe in ownership of private property as well. And if somebody comes to try and take that from you, that is an unjust action. That is stealing. That is. Now, I'm not saying to kill somebody over a piece of property, but we have the right to protect what we have, and the Catholic Church has laid out. Whether it's just war theory, if you want to distill that down into your day-to-day life, or just trying to follow the rules or the stipulations that any one of these saints or the church talks about.
Yeah, no, it's important. I mean, got to have security. A civil society begins with security. Begins with protection of especially the innocent. So, man, some very practical words there. Rick, I appreciate you coming on. We could certainly do this again if you will have me, and I'm sure we could cover a lot more practical and details of how to do this.
You just say the word, man. I'm back here.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate everybody tuning in. And Rick, once again, thanks again for being on The Obligation. And we will talk to you next week. God bless and Esto Vir. If you enjoyed this episode and have any questions or comments or would like to come on the show and discuss your faith walk or any issue regarding the Catholic Church, send us an email at feedback@theobligationshow.com. You can also catch all of our previous episodes and all of the shows of Carolina Catholic Media at www.carolinacatholic.org.